We're happy to be here, and I think a year ago I stood up here and talked about we need to think like engineers, and we need to think differently, and how could we do that to drive decision making. And somebody commented to me afterwards, they're like, Lowe, you can't add 2 and 2 and get 4 every time. So I went out and found me an engineer, hence Ben. So Ben actually is, Ben's a veterinarian, PhD student, but he's an undergraduate engineering major, and so we've taken a different approach. It's really helped me personally think very differently. And some of the things we're going to talk about today are probably not how we traditionally have thought as veterinarians and animal health people about addressing disease transmission and how does the system function. So we've been trying to think about things at the whole, not at the parts, and how does the whole interact to facilitate the movement of and promotion of disease at the industry level. So the question we started working down the path was around cull sows. I really have to thank Paul and Schick. They funded this project, the original project, and they've been key supporters of this cull market thing. You're aware, and we'll talk a little bit about, we did the PED work years ago. We've had certainly great cooperation from the harvest plant staff. We're asking them to do some things that they're not always comfortable with, and we'll talk about how we've gotten to do those things. And then there's been a great advisory committee helping us think about some contacts from that industry, because we're crossing some bridges into some markets, into some people in the marketing channels that aren't necessarily comfortable talking what's going on with disease and how does this work, and we're asking some hard questions that they aren't always comfortable with. So we've spent some significant time actually building that trust, and that cull animal movement committee has really helped us grease those skids and get that information flowing, because it truly is an information gap as much as a knowledge gap. So we started down this path and we asked the question, are trucks important for the movement of disease? And Paul and Tim are in here, and there were 7 or 8 veterinarians that we got to work with in 2014, on the PED movement. And we went into 7 packing plants, collected data, we swabbed trucks before unloading, after unloading, and then recorded some behaviors about what happened on those. So what we figured out was, we swabbed the trailers, we ran the PCRs, and what did we find? Well, what we found is that there were a few trucks positive for PED at the time of entry, but there were 1.7 times as many trucks positive at the time of exit. So the packing plant, and this is on fats, so this is on market animals, the packing plant itself was a potential to expand the outbreak of PED. So this is another one of those duh, the packing plant's dirty. But for the first time, we could start to quantify what's the impact of clean trailers going to the packing plant, coming back out of the packing plant with disease. So expansion of the outbreak at the marketing point, which was a point of collection, which was important. Just as important is that if we had more contact at the plant, more virus, we had a higher probability of being infected. So if you look at the left panel here, when we had I'm smart enough to run this, if the trailer right before it was positive, it was a little over 3 times more likely to be contaminated. So sequence was important. And then if the plant personnel came on the trailer, there was a 4 times as likely to be contaminated. So if you're not familiar with how packing plants work, if there's a down animal, a non-y animal on the trailer, or a dead animal on the trailer, USDA requires that the plant personnel go on the trailer and either euthanize that animal or make a decision on whether it comes on or off. So I can have a clean trailer going up and I can have a trucker that's clean, but when I have a down animal at the plant, people from the plant are going to enter that trailer. And obviously they've been milling in the plant, so they're more heavily contaminated. So movement of people and all their accoutrement onto that trailer to move deads off or bolt guns, etc., increase the risk of contamination. And if there was more virus at the plant, there was a higher rate of contamination, which is what you see in the right panel. So if contact at the plant is a risk, we said we got to understand how are they connected together with trucks, and what risk does that have of spreading disease? So we knew it was possible, we didn't know how possible it was. So my interest is, right, I'm kind of a two-bit veterinarian, and I'm probably a slightly better pig farmer, but not much. But my interest has always been about how impact does it have and how does it impact economics? Because we keep score with dollars or won or whatever, pesos, whatever our monetary thing is, right? It's not about disease-free pigs. It's not about anything else. It's about how do we make money? And so what's the likelihood that that's going to occur, and what's the likelihood that movement is important? So this is a typical movement strategy in market animals, which is what we collected before. So we have pigs, we have a finishing site that's got fats to sell. They haul those direct to the plant. So trailer one's going to go direct to the plant, and then it's either going to go back to finishing site 2, back to finishing site 1, either directly or through a truck wash. Now we can sit in veterinarians and say, well, we really need to wash all those trucks. It ain't going to happen. The cost in an all-in, all-out site, the cost of washing the trailer is more than the potential disease consequences at that site of not washing the trailer if the sites are all-in, all-out, because of the narrow window for the opportunity for disease. So many systems don't wash these trucks, but this is a fairly simple model, right? Like, okay, I can figure out how that happens. So the question came around, what happens with cull market movements? Well, the cull movement, and you're all aware we've had a little Seneca Valley virus in the U.S. The big challenge with the Seneca Valley right now is that the sow farms appear to be negative, but we're having positive cases at the packing plant. Seneca Valley A appears just like FMD. Therefore, the government has to go back through, USDA has to do a full traceback to prove that that's Seneca Valley and not foot and mouth disease. So there's a cost to the industry in slowing the process down. So how is it circulating and what's happening? So this is a fairly rudimentary model of what happens, and as many arrows as there are on this is a gross simplification of the actual marketing channels in the cull side. So I've got a sow farm that instead of going direct to the plant is going to move sows to a collection point, commonly known as a buying station. That collection point is going to distribute those animals to multiple harvest plants and or to other collection points. So we know animals move from the local collection point to a distant collection point, and that's to optimize load so that I can minimize my trucking cost and get animals to the perceived correct market on this end. So once the truck moves from the collection point, it typically goes through a truck wash and then back to either one sow farm or another sow farm. But very routinely, there is a truck wash in this process. So there's basically a series of trucks circulating in the left panel, and there's a series of trucks circulating in the right panel, and these collection points became the connection. Now what we wanted to understand does that influence disease? But we weren't at that point, and we said, can we just understand what these movements look like and quantify that to start to be able to quantify what's the likelihood that that could be ugly over time? So we had to take a step back. We couldn't answer the big question. We had to say, can we just quantify how many sows move from A farm to A harvest plant, and where's the last collection point they were at prior to going to the harvest plant? So what did we do? So we went to a cull plant for a week, and every sow in the United States has to have what's called an 840 tag in her ear at the time of slaughter. An 840 tag is a USDA term for a premise ID tag. It means we have this origin premise written down in a code on the top of that tag that we could quantify. So we went in and grabbed all the tags out of the plant for a week. The plant was kind enough to baggie up those tags for us. So we had all the tags, and those tags were linked to the bill of lading at the time of arrival. So I knew which buying station they came from and what sow farm they came from. So we went back and sorted out the prem IDs, and then we geocoded those prem IDs back to where they were at. We had to manually look those all up. It apparently takes an engineer to do that, because that's what I made Ben do. And then we went in and calculated the distances between the farm, the last known buying station, and the plant. So there were two distances, two vectors we looked at. How far was it from the farm of origin to the last collection point, and how far was it from the last collection point into the packing plant. And then we started sorting out what were those relationships and how were those sows shipped. Let's hit the right button here. So, Ben, why don't you chat a little bit about what happened there?
So pretty much what we did, like he said, we went and collected all those PRRM IDs. In total, there were just shy of 2,300 PRRM IDs we collected. Those originated from 297 farms, and that was 90% of the total kill for that week of that plant. Those farms had quite a wide distribution. So if you look at them, they originated from 21 different states all over the U.S. And Canada. We had a couple loads from Canada that came in. And then as far as collection points, once again, 16 different states where those collection points were, or buying stations, and Canada. Go ahead to the next slide. So, like he said, we looked at a couple vectors. The vectors we looked at, we actually looked at 3 vectors, not 2. So we looked at distance from farm to plant.
Once again, I said that's why you have your engineer around instead of the dumb vet.
Farm to plant, farm to collection point to plant. So if you look at the farm to the plant and the farm to collection point data, or collection point to the plant data, they're very similar. There were some minor variations in those 2 graphs, the 2 distributions, so they're really biphasic in the fact that we have a lot of front-end sows that come into the plant, and we have a lot of sows that were out here in the 700-800 mile range. So the median actually for sows from farm to plant was about 670 miles, I believe. So pretty wide range. So what we wanted to do, though, what was really interesting to us, is we wanted to look at why were there some variations in those 2 graphs. So this is what this is. This is distance from station to farm. So as you would expect, most farms aren't going to load up sows and drive them halfway across the country to one collection point. They're going to drop them off at the local collection point, which is what the majority of them did. But we have all this noise right out here. So that noise actually represents 14% of the sows that were in our data collection. So these sows, they're also outliers in our data. So anything greater than 150 miles or 240 kilometers from the farm to the buying station or the collection point, we're in this 14%. So what we really did is look at those 14% and we thought about them, and we hypothesized that these 14% of the sows that really have significance to the industry, as far as odds are if they're traveling more than 240 kilometers from the farm to the buying station, that's because they moved, or at least the terminal buying station, that's because they moved through multiple buying stations prior to going to the plant. You can go to the next slide. So that's pretty much what we say here. That we can collect data from plants, and it's pretty practical. We collected quite a bit of data. It's just a matter of getting into the plant and getting the data, to be honest. That this is really a national market. So if there's one take home from today, I want it to be that just the expanse of this market. This thing is, this is one plant in 1 week, and we had 23 states that came into this plant. It's a very national chain. And then the other thing would be 14% of calls traveled more than 240 kilometers from the source farm to the terminal collection point. Like I said, that's because we hypothesize that these are pigs that move throughout the channel, have multiple stops along the way, or stay in the chain for a while.
So this is a couple of 3 things. This is 1 week at one plant out of one time of the year. I can't hang my hat on 14%. I don't quite frankly know if it's 48% or 4%. But it's a significant number of these animals that are hanging out in the chain for a long period of time that represent risk. So we said, okay, that's somewhat interesting.
So I will say one quick thing. So in our week's worth of data, that number varied from 0.2% to 32%.
On a given day.
On a given day. So it varies greatly.
So we said, okay, we know it happens. Why does it happen? So when we look at this stuff, we have got, by definition, a big data problem. This is macro data. We need to pulling it together. But our big data problem is we don't have any data. We got a problem. So when we started this project to actually track sows through every movement in the chain. And we said, okay, we know the prem ID, we know the bill of lading, we ought to be able to go back to the buying station and figure out where the shipments came in the buying station and then trace that back and basically do a trace back all the way back to the farm of origin. USDA's traceback model is plant to sow farm. They skip the mess in the middle. Unfortunately, the data in the middle is actually not available. I truly thought, because I'm a cynic, I truly thought for a while they were just lying to me and they didn't want me to have it because they thought there was something bad there. But by almost every recollection of the way we can get at that, the records of movements between plants, or between buying stations, excuse me, are all on paper, and they are only numbers. So how many came in and how many went out. So to reconstruct that within a given chain is bloody near impossible. So understanding the movement bits in the center are going to be a bit of a challenge. And how do we get that done? So we have a data problem to really nail it down. That's why we've used the estimation models we're at. But then we said we could go collect a bunch of data, but that's going to be a lot of work. I mean, this is a brute force thing at this point. It's like literally look at the ID tag, write the number down, look up the prem ID, search backwards. So if we're going to do this, what bits of data do we need to actually predict what's going to happen? Because our interest is in predicting risk, not just merely describing it. So what factors influence the movement? Therefore, what factors do I need to go measure so I can use smart dudes like Ben to actually calculate what those risk contributions are? How do we use machine learning techniques to sort this out, which is all about prediction, but we can't do that if we don't have the right data bits. So we said, well, let's start with what we have and let's build a model to see if we can predict which things might be important. How can we model this up to say then we can go collect data to test this? So that's where we started, and this is where the engineer really had to take over. So this is what we did. So Benjamin, tell us what you did.
Yep. So like we said, this is 1 week worth of data from one plant. So if you know anything about machine learning or neural networks, it takes lots and lots of data to get really, really good predictions. I'll preface it with that. So we're not to that stage yet. So what we just started with was just simple linear regression of different things. So we looked at things that we thought could be influencing the amount of pigs that move in and out of the market. So of course, price, regional price spread, transportation costs, i.e. diesel fuel prices. We looked at the composition of the market as far as lights and heavies in the market. And when we come down to it, really when you run a linear regression and you do stepwise linear regression, you only stick out with one thing, and that's regional price spread. And surprisingly in our data, regional price spread is very strongly correlated to the percentage of sows. So we look at this one, this is percentage of far off sows, so those not the sows that are from more than 250 miles from the plant.
So what we can calculate, because USDA has good data, we know how many sows are in each county. So we drew a circle around the plant and we said, okay, we knew what the plant's capacity was. And we said if they're culling 50% of the sows out of that per year, out of the sow herd per year, and those make it all to this plant, how big of a radius would it take if every cull sow within that radius showed up at this plant? That would be the definition of the local market. I don't move any pigs. I don't have to import any pigs into that region. That was a 250-mile number, basically, when we drew that county data up. So we defined that as the local market. So how many sows had to be sourced outside of the local market, which is a really good way to think about basis. So we use grain buying techniques to think about this. So there's a lot, the people in the grain industry think about this all the time. What's the farm gate price at point X versus point Y to account for trucking, and what should the basis spread be versus what is the basis spread? So basis, if you're not familiar with economic terms, is the price, it's the difference between two prices on a given day in a given market. So we said we want to look at that spread because that gives me a market signal. There's a transportation cost to move that, but there's always price arbitrage that the price difference is actually larger than what the transportation cost is. Grain guys have really elaborate models to do this. They can pull up and say, you're at farm Y, that's where the grain bin is. Here's all the places you could potentially sell corn to. What's the best place to sell corn today? So we said, can we use that approach? So what's the local market to minimize transportation costs was 250 miles. And so anything moving outside of that is a price arbitrage move. Because they're moving that animal for a price reason, not to minimize transportation costs. The price difference is greater than the perceived transportation cost. So we looked at this local region and said, how much are they moving? So that's the basis spread we worked through.
Yep. So if you look at it, you look at percent of far off sows, you can see it increases as our price spread increases. So so if you look at AMS, USDA Agricultural Marketing Service data, they put out hog market reports every day. So I got to go through every one for the last year. But if you look at our week, for example, they'll report 4 different things. They'll report an Eastern Corn Belt region, a Western Corn Belt region, a national region, and then they present Minnesota and Iowa, which is part of the Western Corn Belt. But they present it differently. So here, if you look at our region, minus the national price, as that increases, the number of far off sows also increase. Pretty significantly, pretty correlated. So I thought, well, if that's true, this national one's going to be a little less correlated because it includes the sows that are within our region. So if this holds true, then the other regions should be more strongly correlated. So if you look at Minnesota, Iowa, for example, which is what we did, if you look at it, so if you go over here, there was 0 sows that came in when the price spread was at minus 2 cents.
So what that says is Iowa, Minnesota was 2 cents higher than the plant local price. No sows moved in.
But when we come over to this side, when you get up to over 1 cent or close to 2 cents, we're up here in the 16% of the sows that came in that day were from Iowa and Minnesota. Once again, it's more strongly correlated. Our square value is higher, our p-value is lower, more strongly correlated. So this, to me, like I said, it's very early, very small, limited data set. But to me, this correlation holds true since, logically speaking, this one should be stronger than this one, and it is.
So practically what's happening, sows go to the local buying station. There are 3 major cull sow buyers in the United States. They own lots and lots of stations. They are price arbitraging, moving those animals within their own network to capture the best price on the next day or the day after that or the day after that or 30 days after that. So they're saying, I bought a sow in Minnesota, and on one day I can get more for her in Minnesota than I can in Illinois, and so I left her in Minnesota. But 4 out of 5 days the price was higher in the Eastern Corn Belt, so I hauled her to the Eastern Corn Belt to make money on that because I bought her at price X and I sold her at price X plus 1 cent. In a thinly traded market, or a thin margin market, that is how they're going to make money because they're truly traders. So if we think about the disease implications, right, we can start to predict disease movement into regions. Because remember, we already have data that suggests that when we have contact at the buying station, we have contact at a point of transfer, we can transfer disease from the buying station onto the truck. We now can say what's going on in one region can influence another region strictly based upon price and the local spread and arbitraging that price within the industry. So, quite frankly, I wasn't shocked. Right? We have segments of the industry who are doing what they're paid to do, which is make money. And so we can think about these factors, but as we start trying to understand disease transmission, I think Ben and I are starting to say we got to spend more time thinking about economics and what are the market factors and what are the contributors to that are moving are forcing animal movements and spreading disease on 4 legs or 18 wheels.
Yeah, I mean, when you truly think of it, the only reason a pig would come from Minnesota into the Eastern Corn Belt is solely economical. You look at the drivers. I mean, otherwise, there's plants that you can go to the Western Corn Belt that would be closer, make more sense. They come to the Eastern Corn Belt because then get paid more. It's completely economical driven.
So, next phases, Benjamin.
Yep. So what we wanted to start to do when we started it, it's been difficult, but we started stochastic modeling. Mainly, that's used traditionally in a lot of economic models, because if you look at price spread, it follows what they call a random walk. So which means it just moves randomly up and down throughout every day. It's not a straight line, it's not linear, it's not polynomial, it's just up and down, up and down, up and down every day. So they use stochastic modeling, which takes random variations into variable inputs to look at how it affects an output. So for example, here, instead of this being a linear model, this is percent of far off sows again. This is the distribution of our inputs. So we went back and we took all of the price spreads for the entire year and put them in a model. So you introduce a distribution of inputs, and then it gives you a distribution of outputs. And it includes random variation. So that's why this line here is not linear, because these are random variations in our inputs. So the goal is, of course, with this data, and hopefully with more data, is to build a more sophisticated model. It probably won't be completely stochastic, to be honest. It will probably have some neural network properties. But we have to have this stochastic application to deal with the economics of the model. And then the goal would be is to use this movement data then to apply to known disease outbreaks to say, can we use price spreads, et cetera, to give us an idea or prediction of where disease is going to move based off of that.
So the other piece, I said, data capture has been a brute force project, and so we've moved down a path to say, could we automate prem ID capture? And I think I've spent more time talking about nerd stuff than I can even imagine in the last few months. But we've taken two approaches, and the one we'll talk about today is we think we can use a fairly simple camera technology with a bit of software, which is what Google uses to identify house numbers when they do Google Streets. So they build a visual processing tool that they can take a picture. You can take a picture, it can find numbers in that picture, and then use OCR, or optical character recognition, to convert those pictures, that picture into numbers. So that's publicly available. There's a gentleman out of Kansas City that was interested in doing this in the cattle business, and I said, wait a minute, I actually have something that'd be useful to do that with. And so we moved that. And so the alternative is, right, today we could use RFID tags, and we spent some time working through RFID, and can we find a lower cost RFID tag? But practically today I don't have any way to electronically identify sows, so how could I automate data capture at the plant to make that, not just from a research standpoint, from a traceability standpoint, be able to tell us that, hey, I know what sows showed up at the plant today. Currently that doesn't happen. The tags get cut off and they fall in the bin. And so once that happens, there's no actual recording of those prem IDs going on at the plant, because somebody would have to sit there and write them all down by hand, which isn't practical. So this is what we're doing, and Ben, you might talk through that.
Yep. So the big thing with this type of technology is all about orienting yourself with the image. So, of course, these sows are going to be different orientations, et cetera, et cetera. So the key on this type of stuff is really just, we have to focus in on one thing, and you tell the computer, this one thing that's on every tag has to be the same in every picture. So luckily for us, these prem ID tags have this nice US shield right here. So we just put in our programming that, hey, that shield needs to be in this orientation, and then it's just simply, and we want you to read the 7 digits that follow that US shield. So off we go. It's more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it.
That's the explanation for me. So there's some tricks on the camera, and we've not got all that ironed out, but that's kind of the other parallel project we're running on the analysis side, to say how can we automate that data capture in a way that would speed the process up. There's also some encouraging things coming on the tag side that could give us some hope. There's both a really low-cost, high-frequency tag that will be on the market relatively soon. There's a RFID chip back tag, so animals going through sale barns, we can track that way. And then there's a edible microchip, so the thing they chip dogs with, it's exactly the same thing, except they've changed the components so it's edible, so it can go into the food chain. and that will be coming relatively shortly to the market at a relatively low cost. The ability to literally chip pigs like we chip dogs and horses and retain that through, and we wouldn't have to fish it back out because somehow they've made that, and FDA, actually it's been through FDA approval, they've approved that it's edible. They're working on some materials to get that right. So there's some encouraging things to help us on the data capture, which makes the modeling more effective over time, but right now we're kind of stuck on the brute force approach, and we look forward to working on this some more. Thank you.